Good evening, everyone. I am Charlize Lewis. I'm the Executive Director of Louisville Literary Arts, and I just want to welcome you tonight to our February InKY reading series. We are so excited. We have two authors who are going to share their stories with us. We are very excited that they actually said yes to us, but they are going to be reading some very transparent works tonight. So we just want to encourage them because I do recognize that it may be a little bit difficult at times for them to get through these readings. So we want to keep that in mind. If you look into the chat, you will see that I did put our website address in there for you to go visit that. I just want to put a few announcements out here. We will have the writer's block in the fall. We are preparing for that. We have not had that for 3 years, since 2019. So we are preparing for that, and we are just grateful that we are in that process of getting everything back in order after the pandemic. I also want you to know that you can become a member of the Louisville Literary Arts, and everything is on our website. So with no further ado, we are going to begin with our first author reading tonight, Miss Yvonne Lovell. And so I have this intro. I'm going to read it, and I've added some things so she doesn't know what I've added. Right. So I'm gonna put some extra things in here. Since retiring, Yvonne Lovell has actively pursued her longtime interest in writing. She prefers the creative nonfiction genre and writes essays that tackle themes in her Caribbean background. Her recent publication, Unmooring, is from her working collection of essays about the impact of immigration on her family and the worry she carries with her. She is also a frequent traveler of the world, and she's going to tell you a little about that too. Yvonne serves on the board of directors of Louisville Literary Arts, Inc., and I just want to publicly thank her for the work that she is doing as a board member. And more of her writing can be found at www.thequietandthesilence.net, and I will put that in the chat for you. So with no more hesitation and no more announcements, Yvonne, have your way.
Thanks, Charlize. I'll make sure I'm okay. So I'm alive, right? A little bit of a surprise in the intro there, but the travel piece of it, well, it's not quite true. I'm not going to talk too much about travel today, but I did want to start out on a little bit of a personal note. I'm going to be dedicating my reading this evening to my cousin, who we lost on February 1st in a really tragic accident in New York. She did not survive a car accident in a pedestrian walk. And almost in tragic irony, the moment that was happening, as true immigrants, the family members closest to her, neither were in the country or in the city where she lived. And I thought that was ironic for those of us who are immigrants, because we live in these spaces where we're almost always away from each other. So I wanted to dedicate the reading of my essay to her. The essay in which the essay I'm reading mentions an aunt, and this is not her mother. I just wanted to be clear about that. Now, Charlize tells you that I like to write in the nonfiction genre. Mostly at the moment, I'm writing a collection of essays, and I'm really writing in fits and starts here, but the themes cover immigration, abandonment, and matriarchy. And along in there, there is always some focus and some direction on religious faith. And what I found over the last few years is that my focus has shifted to spiritual practice and what it means to be devout. And that's all the part of who I am. And so it's clearly coming up in my writing. Now, that said, my essay this evening will not be about my faith or religion. One more thing about the essay I'm writing. I've had 5 different titles and I haven't settled on one. So it is untitled, and feel free to offer a suggestion of a title. So without anything further, I'm just going to start reading. The yellow dress she sent me from America was the most exquisite thing I'd ever seen. It was not dowdy and stoic like the pink linen suit and brown plaid skirt with accordion pleats my mother had sent me from London. This dress was dreamlike and yellow like the pale sun. No fussy laciness, made of the finest delicate cotton, and the crinoline sewn into the skirt, not the kind of crinoline made from that membranous material, fishnet-like, that when laundered becomes itchy from the heavy starch. Me never have to wear no half slip without the frock. This dress my aunt sent me was as fashionable as I remember her. Aunts play a distinct role in the life of a child. Like a fairy godmother, they come and go at will. They do everything right, and my Aunt Peggy was no exception. Most Americans would refer to Aunt Peggy as a half sibling, a term I do not like. To me, it implies the option of being family or not. She and my mother shared the same father. Neither of their mothers were married to their father, but she was full-blooded family to me. For a time, Aunt Peggy was a surrogate, filling the void my mother left when she emigrated to England. When I was 10 or 11 years old, I spent my summer holidays with Aunt Peggy. She lived in Priory in the parish of St. Anne, Jamaica. From her veranda, you could see the blue-green Caribbean Sea that made my aunt loved her homeland. But I was too young, the adults too careful perhaps, to walk the short distance down the hill, across the road, onto the beach to wade in the water and find seashells, just as my friends did, whose fathers and brothers knew how to swim. I adored my aunt. She was the lighthearted mother I did not know. Worldly in my eyes, Aunt Peggy seemed to live an enviable life. I thought she was stylish and cosmopolitan and socially connected and had everything she wanted. With me, her rules seemed few and the freedom she gave me endless. And in childhood wonderment, I have clung to that picture of my aunt, but I did not know her dreams for career, marriage, or children were ebbing away unfulfilled. Aunt Peggy would leave me behind to emigrate like my mother and another aunt had done a decade before. But her departure did not seem so permanent. I felt I would see her again. She had left memories with me, not like my mother, who had left me too soon, a toddler, and I could not remember her when she returned. Aunt Peggy emigrated to America just after my 13th birthday. When my aunt got her visa for the United States, the requirements and documentation were onerous, but many Jamaicans were still coming to the United States at the invitation of close relatives who sponsored them for permanent residence. This process of sponsoring family members is still permitted under immigration policy, though today politicians pejoratively refer to it as chain migration. But Aunt Peggy had no relatives to sponsor her, though she would have been past the age limit for such a visa. The preconditions for travelers like my aunt without a sponsor in the US included evidence of strong financial security, such as secure employment, home ownership, and a healthy bank balance. These assurances implied one might more likely return home when the visa expired. My Aunt Peggy met the requirements without difficulty, and to the American government posed no risk of becoming a ward of the state. Therefore, in 1969, she received an enviable 4-year multiple entry visitor's visa. It was the start of her dream for a better life for her infant daughter and extended family. Although any American visa in the hands of a Jamaican was an opportunity of huge value, Aunt Peggy's visa only permitted her to come and go to the United States over the stated duration of the visa. It did not grant her permanent residence. She was not permitted to work. She did. Achieving her stay in America must have been top of mind, though, for my aunt, and I am sure she had a plan. Still, it was a difficult path to a permanent visa. My aunt briefly married. Some suspected for visa convenience, but marriage would have been an unorthodox, even risky strategy to extend her visa. Still, marrying an American would have allowed her to remain in the United States while her American husband petitioned for a permanent resident visa on her behalf. I do not know how my aunt changed her immigration status, and it was 13 years after her first arrival that, as a permanent resident, she sponsored her mother and 12-year-old daughter to join her in America. I immigrated to the United States 8 years after my Aunt Peggy, and it was 6 weeks after classes began at Andrews University in Michigan. The university had not given me financial assistance, and I was not one of the students sponsored by the church like my friends whose fathers were ministers and administrator of a church. Neither did I receive financial support from the Jamaican government to study abroad. That would have obligated me to a student visa and to return home, but would have kept me more financially secure in the US. My grandmother, at nearly 75 years old, had struggled to pay my tuition for the first 2 years of college in Jamaica and could not assist me in the US. I arrived in America October 13th, 1969, with a permanent resident visa in hand and all the legal privileges of living and working without restrictions. It was a miracle. On a colder than I had ever known October day, I called Aunt Peggy from a payphone in the tiny college town near Lake Michigan. I wanted to visit her in New York City at Christmas time. But unbeknownst to me, she was living with a friend on weekends and on weekdays working and living in the home of a wealthy family. In a moment, my hope of a safety net had evaporated. I spent that Christmas with a second cousin, my grandmother's niece, and the only other relative I knew in the United States. She was a guest worker, a registered nurse with living arrangements provided by her employer in New York City. Guest workers then were recruited by US corporations and guaranteed work permits upon arriving in the US. I could be my cousin's guest for the holiday break, but I could not live with her later when I needed shelter. Still, I was grateful for the temporary housing and holiday job, and the earnings tided me over to the next quarter, just not enough. The car ride from Michigan to New York City was the longest I'd ever had. My college roommates, whom I knew from Jamaica, had gotten me the ride with a young man I only knew as a Trinidadian who grew up in America. Driving east from Michigan to New York, we would arrive first in Manhattan. I do not know all the stops we made, but as we approached New York, he told me I would be the last passenger to be dropped off. Though uncertain of his plan, but not understanding the navigation of our route and only somewhat worried about him, I acquiesced. And in the wee hours of the night, my fellow Caribbean, a gallant college senior, walked me to my cousin's door. But before he walked away, he asked whether I would like to go with him to see the Rockettes at Radio City Music Hall. Without knowing what a rockette was, I said yes. It seemed even then like an innocent gesture toward a just off the boat fellow Caribbean. But it would be decades before I understood what it meant to be invited to the famed New York Spectacular, that we were perhaps one of a handful or the only Black or colored people in attendance. I left the university after the spring term ended and went to Rochester, New York, a city where the population was nearly that of my entire nation at an unusual time I had not yet understood. I was penniless with a $2,500 student loan debt, no place to live in a city I had no family, no friends. It was before the winter snow had retreated. I had neither boots nor gloves, and only a short furry coat, prettier than it was warm, the same winter coat I had bought in the Miami airport before I understood the meaning of living in the winter climate. But my mentor, a man I would later marry, had secured a job for me beforehand. He had lived in the United States and Canada long before me and made living arrangements for me at the YWCA hostel. I was grateful, even if anxious, at a time when prospects were dim for cheap accommodations. It was a time when landlords routinely and blatantly lied if a colored showed up to inquire about an advertised vacancy. I went to the job sight unseen at the Aetna Insurance Company in the iconic Sibley building owned by the Sibley, Lindsay, and Kerr department store. The store occupied 4 floors of the building and a connecting tower housed corporate offices. I worked in the tower. The department store had an escalator. I had never seen an escalator before and did not know how to get on or off. But shoppers and office workers entered the building by a revolving door. That door bewildered me. At first, I tried to get inside the pie-shaped wedge with someone in front of me. I imagine now the person's befuddlement, a fright that perhaps might have reinforced the worst fears of coming in close proximity with Black people, just as the end of Jim Crow laws were being put into place. Though I do not remember, someone must have seen me before I got inside that wedge and shoved the door past me. My new job was not difficult, but it was tedious and seemed based on a manufacturing efficiency model. How many sheets type in an hour, in a day, in a week? How many errors? Below target, and there were demerits. Demerits added up and could jeopardize job security. But companies, at least those in northern cities, had begun to take safe bets on hiring more Black people to comply with the Civil Rights Act. As an immigrant with a strong personal recommendation, I was a safe bet, even if overqualified in the typing pool. I did not see my aunt that first Christmas, nor for a long time afterwards. But after my divorce, I relocated to Albany, New York, and it narrowed the distance between my aunt and me to a mere 2-hour Amtrak train ride, and our relationship found its natural rhythm. Aunt Peggy became the voice of my elders in my ear, giving advice and cautions, even as my life and experiences differed from hers. Still, our stories had one familiar theme, a fierce survival instinct of women living life on their terms. We were never again distant from each other. In his book, New York Times reporter Jason DePaul traces the ordeal of a Filipino immigrant family over 20 years across several countries and down 3 generations of the protagonist, Rosalie. The aptly titled book, A Good Provider is One Who Leaves, recounted her sacrifices and triumphant arrival in the United States. Like Rosalie, When my aunt received her visitor's visa, she left behind an infant daughter, just 6 months old. It would be more than a decade before Aunt Peggy's dream was fulfilled. My family's immigration journey has crossed 2 continents for our eventual successes, financial stability, and immense educational progress. But immigration disrupts and robs families of a wholeness they deserve and replaces it with relationships that are sustained by increased wealth during the long absences between parents, spouses, and their children. So it might be what my aunt lost as a mother working overseas fostered our special relationship because she embraced me as if I were a daughter. Perhaps she regretted her complicated relationships with her only child. Yet she had achieved the epitome of a popular belief described in Jamaican parlance as go a foreign fi better yourself. My beloved Aunt Peggy died 53 years after she arrived in the United States. When we gathered for her funeral, we had come from London, Toronto, New York, Orlando, and cities in between. We were successful citizens of the world. I had nearly forgotten the yellow dress from my aunt that left its fashion imprint on me. I still love primary colors, yellow, red, blue, and the many hues of them in the color wheel. But I wore an Indian ink blue-black dress to Aunt Peggy's funeral instead of a yellow one. A full wrap dress, the kind glamorized by Diane von Furstenberg, and a style well-suited to my body. She would have approved. She never lost her sense of fashion. My cousin chose a purple-hued casket, nodding to her mother's love of that color. Yet in that moment, I wanted to be her favorite niece in my yellow dress as my 15-year-old self, remembering her the way I knew her, to think only of her unbounded love for me. Oh, how she stood in the gap and shaped my life. A woman in harmony with her spirit is like a river flowing. She goes where she will, without pretense, and arrives at her destination, prepared to be herself and only herself. Maya Angelou.
Thank you, Yvonne. Does anyone have any feedback, comments, anything for Yvonne? I see Esther Boykin, Yvonne's daughter, is on here. Hey, Esther.
Hey, I just finished work and I'm making dinner, so I'm turning my camera back off, but hi, everyone.
Hi.
Yvonne, I'm going to ask you this question. I think Irv has his hand up. Irv, is your hand up?
Yes, but you go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask this question because I've asked you often. How has your writing really been influenced by, your immigrant experience? And again, I'm going to put the travel on there because you like to travel.
I do. My writing is very much about my immigrant experience. I hadn't thought very much that it shapes who I am as much as it does, but it does. Everything, as you say, from the travel. But there's something about being an immigrant, you really don't have the luxury of not being open. Or at least that's been my experience. I've lived in places that don't have huge populations of my country, of Jamaica. I've lived in Rochester, I've lived in Syracuse, I've lived in New York. Those are not places with huge populations of Caribbean folks. So everything from food to culture to friendships, you simply have to open yourself. And that is, in fact, an advantage of being an immigrant, is that you simply get to experience a lot of different things. So that's, that's one of the big ways in which it has impacted me.
Irv?
Thank you, Charlize. Yvonne, I really connected with your comment about the half sibling. And I come from a blended family myself, and I have to agree that extended families just so much enrich your life. They add so much to both the person that's being kind of the mentor and the mentee. And I certainly, that resonated with me. I just wanted to share that with you.
Thank you.
And you keep saying you don't have a title, but I think it's the title you said from the beginning, the yellow dress.
Okay. All right. We will keep that title then. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Yvonne. Thank you. We appreciate
Thank you for having me.
All right. Let's go to our next author for the evening. And I'm going to pronounce your last name the correct way. So we have tonight with us Claudia Love Meyer. She's the coordinator of the Kentucky Black Writers Collaborative. She is a working writer, currently finishing a young adult novel. Claudia is also the author of 11 books, both fiction and nonfiction. Now, I did my own research. Her book, Don't You Fall Now, can be found on Amazon. She is also the critically acclaimed author of the Amanda Bell Brown mysteries, the Exorcister series, and the Christie Award nominated Zora and Nikki, a novel in black and white. She lives in Lexington, Kentucky with her daughter and 3 adorable cats. So, Claudia, you have the floor, you have the Zoom, you have our ear and our attention.
Thank you so much for having me, Louisville Literary Arts, especially you, Charlize. I'm honored to be a part of the InKY reading series. I'm going to have to ask you all to forgive me because a lot of my focus will be on my papers because it's very hard for me to concentrate these days. And before I go into anything else, Yvonne, I'm really sorry for your recent loss. So as Charlize mentioned in my bio, I am the coordinator for the Carnegie Center's Kentucky Black Writers Collaborative. Our mission is to support Black writers and elevate, amplify, and celebrate our voices. Black writers are disproportionately subject to economic, educational, and publishing disparities. With that understanding, our initiative was created so that our members, writers at every level, benefit from taking our writing and language classes at no cost. In addition, the KBWC hosts events for the community at large, including our bi-monthly Black and Lit book club, featuring our most accomplished Black Kentucky authors. This spring, we are unveiling a project that fuses art and writing that we call At the Clearing. The name is based on a passage from Toni Morrison's Beloved, in which Baby Suggs brings her community together to express their joy and pain. At the Clearing is inspired by the killing of Kentucky's own Breonna Taylor, say her name, by officers of the Louisville Metro Police Department executing a no-knock warrant. On March 12th, the day before the anniversary of her death, from 7 to 9 p.m., we will gather at the Carnegie Center to witness, to remember, to grieve, pouring libations, breaking bread together, and hearing words that are certain to heal. Our vision is being brought to life by acclaimed Lexington artist Kipto Taurus. We welcome all of you to join us on this special night. If you'd like more information about the Kentucky Black Writers Collaborative, please go to our website at www.carnegiecenterlex.org. And if you'd like to know more about the clearing, you can also find that on our website, or you can email me, Claudia@carnegiecenterlex.org. Now on to my reading. I'll be sharing a short collection of prose and poetry that I call After You Went to Sleep. Abby, who I've referenced a few times, is my daughter. After You Went to Sleep. Prose and poetry to my son. On October 17th, 2021, my 32-year-old son died of a drug overdose. I began to write about it on Facebook while my virtual community lovingly held space for me to publicly grieve. Some of the prose and poems from that time are gathered here. The writing isn't quite polished yet, but they express everything that I felt and continue to feel. As of this reading, it has been less than 4 months since he passed away. I have PTSD with aversions, which include me being unable to look at his picture or say his name. So I have modified these pieces as if I were writing directly to him, using pronouns you and your. The last piece will be the only time I will say his name, which I have barely said since the end of December. I dedicate this compilation to my son, my Carnegie Center and Facebook family, and all the ride or dies, some of which I see here, who kept strong hands at my back. Because of COVID, you can't go to the morgue to identify your loved one. So the coroner actually came to me, and I would identify him by photographs. This is called the coroner at 3 a.m. The coroner came bearing pictures that cold October morning. The time was 3 a.m. He told me and Abby to brace ourselves, that they would be hard to see. Then one photo at a time, he took you away from me. The first photo was your tattoo, a tree, black creeping branches sprawling up your arm like veins. The second was the red t-shirt I watched you effortlessly slide on that day. Now a pause before the hardest of them all, your undeniable sleeping face. God, how I wish I hadn't seen the coroner at 3 a.m. with his grim and breaking news, ruthlessly changing everything. This haiku is the most frequent thing that was said to me during this time. Haiku. All the writers said after you went to sleep that they have no words. We knew that he would not want a funeral, so we never got a funeral home involved. So he was to go directly from the morgue to the crematorium. The policy at the crematorium was don't let any loved ones see the body before they cremate it. But because I couldn't go to the morgue, I really wanted to see my boy before they cremated him. So the kind crematorium director allowed me to say goodbye. This one is called Crematorium. You looked asleep. I imagined you resting after the tall day, after the last time you laughed, while the sun ribboned dusk into streaks of flame, after the black sky swaddled you, blanketing you in stars, while you lay motionless on the ground, fingers of grass stroking your arms, the night shadows grown long. I pictured you reviewing your day, saying your longing prayers, taking your medication and waiting for peace before you closed your eyes and finally went to sleep. In the end, before the fires burned the shell you left behind, I mama kissed your brow that had gone cold. I wouldn't eat or drink once I got home, not while the chill of your forehead lingered on my lips. This next one is called Black Dress. I wanted to be reverent, but still feel like myself. I wanted to wear a black dress, a garment the color of mourning. This Black woman, having known my skin ascribed to negative things, but I was not woke that week. I was your mama, steeped in grief. If it were reversed, your choice would be cheerful, something bright. But for you, I wanted to wear all black, knowing that you'd probably roll your eyes at that. At Ross, I assaulted the dress racks, riffling through them, the options few. Not this one, no, not that one, no, no, no. I searched frantically, confused, until I didn't know what to do. That's when you came. Spirit arms wrapped around my waist. You were with me to let me know I'd be okay. Mom, you said in a voice I didn't hear, but felt. I don't begrudge you wearing black, but at least look like a badass. Your visitation grounded me. I looked again and I saw it. Black sheath, leather looking in the front, lace cap sleeves, a dress as badass as you wanted it to be. You knew in that dress, death would have no victory. And when I wore it, I would feel like me. Shit man. My favorite story about you happened when you were 2. From the time that you were a baby, I worked with you, my boy in a sling on my hip, my boss baby. We were taking care of business. This night, your Baba had a customer looking over merchandise. Every sentence this bro said was punctuated with shit, man. Out of everything that brother said that night, shit, man became your favorite saying. You were 2. And every time you said it, I corrected you. Shit, man. Don't say that, baby. It's not nice. Shit, man. Honey, please don't say that. Shit, man. Again and again for weeks. One day I was driving and it was just the 2 of us. Shit, man. I ignored you. Shit, man. I didn't say a word. You had to wonder what was happening. In our call and response game, I'd gone off script. After numerous tries, you went, Mom, I said shit, man. I heard you. I knew you were perplexed. I bit my lip to keep from laughing at that mess. But you were quiet and never said shit, man again. I guess it wasn't fun without a rise out of me. Obituary. I got a text from a grown-ass man. He wanted to know what would go in the obituary. He spelled it Bitchuary. When I told Abby, she shook her head. That sounds like January for bitches, she said. I had to admit, it did. After everyone has taken care of you those first few weeks, they go away to their lives as is appropriate, and then you are left to do a number of things. This one is called After Everyone Was Gone. I threw away the flowers, but kept the dried lavender and yellow roses. They were still beautiful, even dead. I took down the Halloween decorations because your lingering haunted me. I cleaned, I cleared, I cried, tried to will myself whole, failed to will myself whole, and cried again. But I stayed vertical, the harder choice most days. I didn't stop tossing flowers and taking down ghosts. I kept moving. That had to be enough after everyone was gone. This is not a poem, son. It just sounds like one. Right away, his father began to dream about him, but I didn't. And I envied those dream visitations. And then finally, weeks later, I had my first dream about him, and I call this Dream One. He visited my dream, stood in the kitchen plundering the cabinets, found a pack of ramen, and asked, "Can I have this?" Dried chicken flavored noodles hung limp in your hand. Confused, I thought, but you were dead. Yet there you were, grinning wide, shaking your dreadlocked head at the statement I never said. You looked at me, love like a child's in your eyes, but you were quiet as a tomb. I had one question. I asked you, are you here? You, the one whose ashes sweep the depths beneath the gown of a waterfall, my now sleeping, never waking, slumber taken boy. Are you here? I reached for you, but you had passed, way beyond my grasp. You strolled down the hall, ignoring your brother on the sofa, and I, as desolate as a burial ground, asked my only living son if you're here, but he was silent. So I rushed behind you, not ready to lose you once again. Are you here? The words chased you down, but they faded in the air. And like a last breath, they were gone. I could not get to you. So close. You weren't even a ghost headed to your sister's room. That endless hall, how many miles long? And you were out of reach, you looking solid like a rock of a boy thrown to a shore, flung far away from me. Is he here? I asked your sister, but she was quiet as death. Then you were gone. I bolted awake, bursting through the sepulcher of sleep, my hand flying to my racing heart, the gesture of a mother bereft who had lost her son, even in her dreams. And you were not here. This next one is called Beautiful Things. Don't worry about me. I still find pleasure in beautiful things, like glittery shoes and Christmas socks, blanketed in falling leaves from ginkgo trees. the second dream that I had about him. Every time I dream of you, you're leaving. In the chaos of my sleeping mind, you're ready to go. This time you're in fatigues, green and brown like the earth and grass you lay on before you went to sleep. You held a duffel bag, a black burden that looked heavy as a smothering night. I'm wearing a dress the color of a white winter sky, a blood red scarf like a severed umbilical cord tied about my neck. I do not understand these troubling dreams. You looked at me, round-shouldered, fatigued, like the garment you wore. I don't understand the symbols and dreams. Was the bag you shouldered the weight of your addiction? I don't get these things, scattered like detritus in my dreams. I wanted to hold you before you went away, a long, strong hug around your neck, but you slipped out of my arms and went away. I woke and wondered if I'll ever make sense of the senseless things that happen in these dreams. At some point, I began to have physical symptoms that mimicked cardiac concerns. And I went to my doctor, who suggested that I might have broken heart syndrome, which is a real thing that you can actually die of a broken heart. So this next one is called The Heart is a Muscle. I've been not quite fainting. I get dizzy and drop to the floor. Might be broken heart syndrome, something I already know. My shattered heart still cuts me with shards of memories, confetti scraps of your baby pictures, like razors slicing me. JC told me, my heart is a muscle and yours is working hard. My heart's job was to hold you, but you left. You broke my heart. My heart is a muscle with chambers where I keep my sacred things. Your heart, your mind, your kids, your life, even the way you sang. The left ventricle falters, my blood, a movie monster blob. It oozes through my body, sinking me to the ground. My poor heart laboring, yet hardly working at all. This last one is called The Release. We made our way toward the waterfall, Abby and me, our phones lighting the way down slick stone stairs. I carried the ornate box with your cremains. Abby held the screwdriver. I'd have to unscrew the bottom, the only way to access the plastic bag you're in. In the frigid November air, we kept our heads down. The circles of our phone lights no match for the inky dark. We trudged behind a crowd of chattering moonbow seekers, none of which were likely to say goodbye to their child that night. The bustling throng in the upper observatory obscured our view. All we could see before us was wet rock walls. I couldn't let you go in that crowd. So we changed course toward the lower observatory where few had gone. To keep from falling, our gazes never strayed from the slippery, stony steps. When we'd gone down as far as possible to go, a thin metal rail stood before us. And when we lifted our eyes, we saw magic. There she was, Cumberland Falls, that grand lady dressed resplendently in a gown of falling water. At the sight of her, I drew in my breath, stunned by the wonder, and it felt as if my heart would beat out of my chest. As magical as that, above the lady's cascade, a perfect arch of glowing white like a halo lit the lofty night. The moon bow I feared I wouldn't see, like a welcoming smile, greeted me. Though I'd never seen her, this waterfall knew who I was and what I'd come to do. And all at once, I knew her too. If nature ever equaled divine love, Mama God in nature had come and asked for you, my son. My fear of your ashes vanished. Abby gave me the screwdriver and turned her iPhone flashlight toward me so I could see. Mama Waterfall waited patiently while I loosened the screw, my fingers numb from the cold. That was hard, but you do what you gotta do. In one swift motion, I pulled the plastic bag out and set the box on the wet ground. I held your ashes to my heart, letting myself feel the weight and how they shifted in the bag like sand. Everything around me faded. Abby, the rest of the crowd, until there was nothing left but you and me, a waterfall and a moon bow. I held you for a long time, cradling you as my tears mingled with a soft spray of water. I undid the twist tie and heard the clank of the metal tag attached hit the ground. With every bit of tenderness in me, I opened the bag, dropped my head. It was time to say my last goodbye before I released you. Now I lifted my head. Mama Waterfall in her white gown stretched her arms toward me saying, Mama, it's time. I took a deep breath, leaned over the rail, and poured what remained of you between her stone feet and luminous skirt. Goodbye, son. I love you so much. You belong to God and the ancestors now, and to Mama Waterfall. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I whispered into the night for letting me be. Lumumba, Allende, Ade, Bandelays, Mama, and for mothering me tonight. I took a deep healing breath, knowing you are one with nature now. And I will find you in the breath of the wind, the baby blue of the sky, and the slanted silver rain. And every time I visit Mama Waterfall, in her fine mist, I'll feel you touch my face, making my heart a waterfall flowing deep and wide and wild. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claudia, for allowing us to really be able to, in some ways, hear and witness your grief process as you're on your way, to recovery. And I'll say this, it's always going to take time and time and time. And I just appreciate your transparency for that, because it really actually made me reflect on the passing of my brother's stepson and how it's a process. And it kind of doesn't hit like a mother's love. Thank you so much for that.
I'm sorry for your loss, Charlize.
Thank you. It was actually 3 weeks after my father died. It was a lot.
Lord have mercy.
Mhm.
Sorry for that loss as well.
Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions for me?
I just want to say I love you, Miss Claudia.
Thank you, Brittany. I love you too.
Hey, Claudia.
Hey, Eugenia.
Sending love.
Thank you. I love you, sis.
Just thank you for sharing. I know it was hard and sharing your heart with us. We appreciate it. And we honor you and your son.
Thank you.
Well, I just want to thank both of our authors tonight for reading and reading very transparent stories and sharing their stories with the world. Not just the written story, but also the story behind the story. I think sometimes we don't always get to understand what's the motivation for our writing. Where does it come from? And so I do appreciate you both for coming out tonight. Once again, if you all want to be a part of Louisville Literary Arts, we are doing some work with the Carnegie Center in the upcoming months, and we appreciate that collaboration. And we also, again, if you want to be a reader for our InKY series, you can go on our website and you can fill out a request form, and we will be glad to accommodate you sharing your stories and your writing, your art, because it's art. So again, thank you all so much for joining us tonight, and hopefully we'll see you again in the coming months. Thank you.
Thank you for having us. Thank you for coming, everybody.